Hello, Internet friends, and welcome back to Love Hate Relationship, an opinionated podcast for opinionated people. I'm Andy Boel.
And I'm Alex Ruiz, and we're here to brighten your day, anger your soul, and tell you how to live your life. In that order.
That's absolutely right.
Andy, I hear you're busy these days.
Yeah, October is one of the few times Orlando gets really slammed with production work, which, good problems to have and all. But I went from a summer of just reading comic books and not doing much of anything to, oh my god, it's 4 already. Let's go. I've got like 8 things I still need to do.
Oh, sweetie. I'm so sorry.
It's okay, man. Like I said, good problems. I prefer this to the dead time, so.
See, I'm the opposite. Like, I would so much rather just have nothing to do at all than I can just, work on my own crap. And then when things are busy, I'm just kind of frenetic and exhausted and feel like, I don't know. I would so much rather have a ton of downtime and just go, all right, well, I have downtime. I can do my own shit now.
Yeah. You know what I actually have realized? I'm okay when it's absolutely dead so I can work on my own stuff, like start a podcast with my friend. And I'm okay when it's been super busy because I sort of get into the zone and get into the grind. I hate the transition between the two. I hate when it's been dead and all of a sudden you're busy and vice versa.
Okay.
So you have been on vacation since last we spoke.
I did take a trip. So I went up to New York, and that was my birthday gift from Stephanie. We hung out in Brooklyn a whole hell of a lot because I'd never spent any significant amount of time in Brooklyn. I think I mentioned on an older episode that I was planning on going to a bunch of I had discovered that there were these Asian Mexican fusion restaurants.
Right.
I didn't find any of them. Brooklyn, it turns out, and no one ever talks about this. Brooklyn's fucking huge, guys. Brooklyn is enormous and kind of hard to get around. If you're taking the subways, a lot of the time you got to take a train into Manhattan just to change trains to get back into Brooklyn. And it is weird. But no, we still had a great time. I got to see a couple of friends. I got to visit Coney Island, which I'd never done before, and it was interesting. It was closed for the most part, but we still got to walk around and check stuff out, and we had some Manhattan times, and I'm just kind of reminded, okay, this is a place that I love absolutely. And it's funny, the older I get, the more I'm okay with the fact that I don't live in New York or have never lived in New York and probably never will. There was definitely a time in my life where I was like, I want to live here. This is the only place I want to live. And now I'm kind of it's probably pretty okay that I don't.
Now, do you think New York specifically or just incredibly dense metropolitan areas in general?
I think, honestly, dense metropolitan areas in general. I think about other cities in the area or other large cities where we could, maybe move and do all right. Nashville's not that far away from where we are. And I've loved Nashville when we visited. I thought it was so cool. But here's the thing. If we lived in Nashville, we would not live in downtown Nashville.
No.
We'd probably live somewhere. Not even if it's not I'm not saying suburbs, but just not in the main metropolitan area. 'Cause it's you have to contend with the existence of kind of that apartment style living. Never mind that okay, fair enough, it's the most efficient form of living, but you have to deal with neighbors on all sides, with walk-ups, not really having a ton of space. I don't know. The more time I spend where I am, the more inclined I am to kind of see those metropolitan areas as places to visit and maybe places to hang out in, but I don't think I'd want to stay there.
Sure. Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You either have that vibe or you don't, and it's not a right or wrong sort of thing.
Yeah. It's just weird that it's my tastes have shifted over the years. Maybe I'm 29 now, and I think I'm finally slowing down.
Well, I wasn't going to put it that way, but yeah, maybe,
Oh, sure, yeah, no, I'm 29. I'm 3/4 of the way dead, Andrew. Like,
this is true.
yeah.
I followed your guys' Twitter feeds while you were there religiously, and my highlight of your trip is the two of you talking about how navigating the New York subway system is like a scavenger hunt, except it smells like pee.
That was Stephanie's statement on it. Yes, that it was exciting. It was fun. We got lost like twice. Like we got on trains in the wrong direction. Oh, stereotype to break. On no fewer than 2 occasions, we had random, like clearly have been living here for years, New Yorkers come up to us and ask us, "Hi, you guys look like you need a little help. Do you need some help with finding where you're going?" Like, they were super sweet.
Aww.
And super kind. And yes, in a place like New York, there are tons of people who all have places to be and can sometimes be a little brusque, or can sometimes not think about space too much, or rather they know the space that they inhabit, and if you are not considerate of space around you, you're an asshole. But, like, there are a lot of people who are very kind and willing to come up to you and just help out because they can see that you're lost and they can see that you need a little assistance. And, yeah, we don't typically think of that when it comes to major metropolitan areas, especially in the Northeast, but people were super nice.
That's absolutely wonderful. That's what we need nowadays. More of that.
Yes, more kind New Yorkers who... just kind of sweet and nice and happy to be there and okay with your being there.
Fuck you, my friend. Enjoy your day.
Indeed, my man. Well, awesome.
Yeah.
So, what are we talking about?
Quick format disclosure, because it's been brought to our attention that we very often do not actually disclose the format of this show. Folks, this is Love-Hate Relationship. We do 3 segments for each of these episodes. First off, one of us brings a topic of something we love.
Yep.
Then the other of us brings a topic of something we hate. We trade those off. And then at the end, we take a relationship question from one of you, our lovely audience. And we try and give you the very best, tremendously unqualified, but tremendously well-meaning advice we possibly can.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
I do my best. Okay, so it is my turn to talk love. So, Andrew, I thought this would be fun to do a little bit of a challenge.
Okay.
So those of you who read the title to this, it shouldn't be a surprise. My love for this episode is The Doors, the 60s psychedelic rock band who... most people probably know for songs like Break On Through,
yeah.
Light My Fire, Touch Me, Roadhouse Blues, etc. But I want to do something a little bit different with this discussion. So following this disclaimer right here, Andy, I ask you, and I will do my best to do the same thing, I want to have a discussion about The Doors where, at least until the very end, we don't name or mention or allude to lead singer Jim Morrison any more than we have to.
Any more than you just
Do you
did.
accept?
Okay.
Yep. Any objections to that?
Is calling him Val Kilmer a cop-out?
Yes.
Okay.
Although,
it's going to be harder than I thought then.
Look up idiot in the dictionary. You know what you'll find?
A picture me?
No! The definition of the word idiot, which you fucking are.
We'll see. I do have in my notes a couple of, just mentions where I make a comment or two where I have to, because I'll be talking about composition, but I want to spend as much of my time as possible talking about the other 3 members of the band.
Okay.
So, Andy, you ready to go?
Absolutely. Go for it.
All right. So, some basic background. The Doors formed in 1965, featuring keyboardist Ray Manzarek, a friend of his from his meditation classes, drummer John Densmore, guitarist Robbie Krieger, and some other dude who Manzarek went to film school with. Following stints as the house band for both the London Fog and the Whiskey A Go-Go in LA, where that other dude got them fired for drunkenly screaming fuck words at the audience, they signed with Elektra Records in 1966 and would go on to release 8 albums over the next 5 years. 7 of which made the Billboard Top 10 and went at least platinum. And then finally, after What's His Ass stupidly died in Paris in 1971, Krieger and Manzarek shared lead vocals on 2 additional, very underrated albums before the lineup officially disbanded in 1973. Krieger and Manzarek later reformed, with Densmore choosing to sit out, and there was a legal battle over the name. You might have seen stories maybe 10 or 12 years ago for The Doors of the 21st Centuries, with Ian Asbury from The Cult doing a lot of the vocal duty. Yeah, there was some disputes there. They went on to play as Riders on the Storm and later Krieger Manzarek, but afterwards all of them basically went on to quiet but moderately successful solo careers. So there's your background on the Doors before we get into this discussion. Now, what were you going to say, Andy?
Well, so I want to go back and you touched on putting out 8 albums over 5 years, and I'm genuinely curious, but I feel like that's a lot, right? That is such a impressive output, or was it not? And everyone was doing that back then, and the Doors just stuck around in my memory.
You know, it is funny because nowadays we think about it, it's I think most of the music acts I'm familiar with, they do an album every, once a year is considered pretty decent.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time following hip hop acts, and a lot of them will do like album and then like maybe a couple of mixtapes, which are usually a couple of alternate versions of a few songs and then a few like B-side tracks. If you spent a lot of time listening to deep cut albums from alternative bands back in the 90s, it was pretty normal to do like LP and an EP. They'd have the additional thing that was like another 4 tracks, and it would kind of be associated with the album. But when you get to the 60s, or really like that whole 50s, 60s, 70s era, it was not unusual for a band to do maybe 2 albums in 1 year. Like, I know Black Sabbath, they released their first 2 albums both in 1970, within about 7 months of each other. I'm pretty sure the first couple, Led Zeppelin did their first, 4 albums, I think, in about 2 years, 3 years, something like that. And think about the Beatles. The Beatles did, I think, in an 8-year period, I think they did 10 albums, 11 albums, so not quite once a year, but a little more frequently than that.
Sure. It's so interesting, because I can't put myself in that mindset of what that was like for bands to be producing music quicker, but also there's no social media, and it's so much harder for people to get the word out. But I guess those 2 things go hand in hand. Bands had to have what would be perceived now as a increased output so they could stay more relevant.
Sure. And I mean, I think about looking specifically at the Doors.
Yeah.
Before their first album came out, they had spent basically that year coming together and kind of crafting a lot of these songs. When they did those club gigs, they basically did like a series of some covers and then also their own originals. And they just basically spent a year compiling music, and those first 2 Doors albums were all songs that had been written kind of in that first year. And even the 3rd album, which I want to say that was Soft Parade. Yeah, but even that 3rd album, still, I think maybe half of it was all songs that they had written that 1 year. So they had this large repertoire of covers and reworked covers and originals, basically 2.5 albums worth before they were even signed.
That makes a lot more sense then. But yeah, people our age and younger are going to be less familiar with the band, with the group. I have to admit, I really didn't listen to the Doors very much at all until high school, and just sort of stumbled upon the initial album and went, oh my God, what have I been missing? And got myself caught up. But their impact on rock and on the on the California 60s 70s rock culture at the time, I really think can't be understated. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they're one of the bands that like made Whiskey A Go Go famous.
Yes. So in the 80s, when all the hair metal bands were kind of really zeroed in on the Sunset Strip, a lot of them have talked about this in interviews since. The big goal, the big thing that they all wanted was to headline a night at the Whiskey A Go Go, because that was where the Doors had played very famously, and and the A&R people would basically just go to the headline shows at the Whiskey A Go Go, and that's where they would go and sign Motley Crue or Poison or Cinderella or Faster Pussycat or any of those bands.
Yeah, so they're one of the pillars. They're maybe a little less well known, maybe a little dusty to today's sensibility, but it's not inaccurate to call them one of the pillars of rock and roll, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, they're always up there in those discussions with the Hendrix Experience, with Big Brother and the Holding Company, Jefferson Airplane, a lot of those kind of those post-Beatles, even though the Beatles were still playing at the time, but those kind of post-Beatles, post-British invasion psychedelic acts.
Yeah.
The Doors are always featured really, really heavily in there. And I think that that's valid, when I think about where the Doors exist in kind of this realm of music and this period of time, setting aside the implications that what's-his-face completely everyone thinks about in terms of their lyrics and the quote-unquote tragedy of death or whatever, I think about their sound. And this is something I really wanted to key in on is, when you think about psychedelic sounds, most people will tune over to kind of like maybe the Grateful Dead influence, that weird kind of evocative experimental electric guitar playing, which Robbie Krieger was perfectly capable of doing, but also that weird synth line. Like this was before the 80s kind of turned synthesizers into a mainstay instrument, but you had this kind of noodly, very soloistic organ style that would later kind of get refocused as bands like Deep Purple came out, and the keyboard kind of became a heavier sound. What Manzarek did with the keyboards in the Doors was he basically took the shit that he learned playing organs in churches and built this like high psychedelic, almost jazzish but very unique solo style and riff style with the keyboards. And when that going back and forward with the guitar that Krieger would play created this really weird, unique sound that I don't know any other bands that sound like the Doors. It's one of the things that I love about them.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, you think about just the opening notes to Light My Fire, the sort of it's almost carousel-esque. And
yes.
I think I remember watching like a VH1 special on them or on the initial album or something, and basically it was described that Krieger was basically keeping beat with the guitar instead of Densmore with the flamenco guitar influences, and keeping beat that way. And Manzarek on the organ was basically, you've said it better, but basically manning the bass line. So taking these things that instruments do, but doing them with different instruments. Yeah. That's something that's unique. That's something I haven't seen other people really try to do. And that's something that I help makes their sound so incredible.
Yeah. So I put down notes specifically on Light My Fire because It's by no stretch of the imagination is it my favorite Doors song, but I think it's a really interesting song to kind of get into their process, because that song was initially written by Krieger. This is the part where if you watch the Doors, the Oliver Stone movie, like that scene where they're in a beach house and Robbie Krieger is like, I wrote a song, guys. And he takes out this like notebook paper and he starts playing this like folky, know that it would be untrue, know that I would be a lie. Like that was how Light My Fire was originally conceived. Krieger had written it as kind of like this folksy song. They said that it kind of sounded like the Byrds. Yeah. Very, very harmonious and nice. And then what the band did, and this is how they did most of their songs, was they took it and they started messing around with it and playing through it in different ways. So you had Krieger, who, by the way, can play blues, can play rock, can play R&B, can play flamenco, can play classical Spanish guitar, can play all of these styles, and does them all really well. Highly recommend, if you can look up any of Robbie Krieger's solo stuff from like years after the Doors, he has some of the best jazz guitar playing, like period. But, so you have this folksy song. You get Densmore on it, and Densmore is playing around with these different styles, and then he settles in on a bossa nova beat, which is Brazilian samba music. And he's like, I kind of like this with the bossa nova. Let me play this bossa nova beat over it. And it was really weird for that song at first, but it clicked. It worked really, really stupidly well.
Yeah.
And then and with that, you know, Krieger started adjusting his guitar playing, especially because he decided to kind of give it a little bit more of a straightforward edge, but also he was using these like flamenco-style chord progressions. And then Manzarek, just kind of fiddling around, comes up with that opening riff, and it all comes together into this really different, kind of weird song, but it works so well for what it is.
Yeah, and then you've basically got these three musical geniuses who are experimenting in a way that just totally works, plus their homeless friend who, starts screaming his own lyrics off the top of his head.
Yeah, basically. Like the second verse was what Krieger did not write, and it was like, there should be a love part, but there should also be a death part, and it's like, sure, whatever, who cares? But the point is, Light My Fire was their first big hit, and it came together because they blended all of these weird, disparate influences. And if you go through their catalog, the shit that they're able to come up with, you get a song like Love Street,
right,
which is kind of this very boppy, acoustic kind of deal. But then you also get Roadhouse Blues, which is a hard blues, like straightforward, dirty ass song, and it's fantastic. And they can do that naturally. They'll take Bertolt Brecht's Alabama song. Like that is, a lot of people don't realize, Alabama song, like that was originally from a Bertolt Brecht musical, which Manzarek just had like a copy of in his record collection, and they were all sitting around listening to it, and they decided, hey, what if we turn this into like some weird kind of bouncy rock song with funky percussion aspects. And that song is, as a reimagined Brecht song, is so weird but so perfect to that band. So much so that so many people don't realize that it's even a cover, No,
absolutely. I didn't know that until we did some research on it, and you think about it and you're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense now that those are lyrics from a musical, but the lyrics of the Doors discography as a whole are so whimsical and so bizarre and so poetic that at first glance it's like, oh, okay, no, this is just how they do it.
Yeah. So, for me, when I when I originally started listening to The Doors, and this is actually not that different from when you started. I listened to them maybe a little bit earlier, like late middle school. Just as I was kind of starting to dig into all of that, I read No One Here Gets Out Alive, which is a biography about what's his ass. I read that. I watched the Oliver Stone movie. I got all of their albums and I listened to them through constantly. And I was very enamored with the lyrics and the singing and the vocal performance. And it was only as I got older, and maybe the running theme of this discussion is coming away from kind of the weird hooks that get you when you're young and you start listening to this music, the hooks of these stories. We talked about tortured artists a while ago, and this idea, this narrative that we have, coming away from that and learning to appreciate the music as music. And it was really after I started playing guitar that I picked up, ironically, Andrew, when I was a senior in high school, and you were a sophomore. We took a trip to New York.
That's true.
And while there, I went into a music shop, and I bought a book of Doors sheet music, which I still have. I still have this book. And I started studying this book to try and learn how to play Doors songs from sheet music. And A, it's incredibly difficult because Krieger is a really brilliant guitarist whose stuff is not always terribly easy. But B, it was sheet music for all instruments, I was looking at these drum parts. I was looking at the keyboard parts. I even looked at the bass parts, which is funny because the Doors didn't have a regular bassist. Their bassist was Ray Manzarek's left hand, because he played a Fender Rhodes keyboard bass that he would put on top of his regular organ. So his left hand would play a bass line and his right hand would play the melody parts. That's how they did that during all their live shows. Now, granted, in the studio recordings, they'd hire studio bassists because the actual bass guitar just sounds better on record. Yeah. But that's how they played their live shows, was Manzarek's left hand played the bass part. But it had bass music. It had all of this, and I really started digging into a lot of these songs, and I realized, oh my god, the sheer musicality of this band. Every member who plays an instrument plays that instrument so terrifyingly well, just so brilliantly,
right?
That and it all blends together, and once again, this is a topic where I am angry that people don't give it more credit, that people don't notice it, that I can say Ray Manzarek and Robbie Krieger and nobody knows who the fuck I'm talking about, when they're these brilliant music. Krieger played all those songs without a pick. He did it all with his fingers. He played every song throughout the course of the Doors' career without a pick.
I'm just imagining the rock-hard, blistery, terrifying stumps that must have been on the end of his knuckles.
I'm saying, and he did it because he was like, yeah, I wanted to see how much I could do without playing with a pick for some years. And sure. Later he would go on to keep playing he would play with a pick again later, and then not later, and that's the lunacy of that, the solo on 5 to 1, playing that with just your fingertips. I've tried to learn that solo multiple times. I can't play it with a pick. I can't play it without a pick. I don't have the coordination to play it with my fingers, but I'm not fast enough with a pick to play it.
Yeah, I think for anyone who is particularly interested in the musicality and less in the cult of personality of the band, I think you're absolutely right that Manzarek and Krieger and Densmore deserve much, much, much higher praise than they get in the public eye. It's unfortunate that they are not on a t-shirt and therefore not synonymous with the band like certain other people are.
Yeah, I mean, let's be fair. They're ugly. They are 3 ugly men. They are. And also, it just... I don't know, man. when I think about a lot of these bands, especially of the era, we don't do this with the Beatles, Sure, everyone knows that John and Paul were some of the better musicians, or rather the better songwriters.
Sure.
George Harrison, had he been in any other band other than the Beatles, would have been the head songwriter. But he was in a band with Paul McCartney and John Lennon, so he got screwed there. But he was wonderful.
Yeah.
And Ringo is Ringo. And
Ringo got to write Octopus's Garden, and Paul hung it up on the refrigerator.
Oh, sweetie. Well, also, he did a little with a little help from my friends, which is a great song.
That's true. He did.
That's terrific, and he sang on a bunch of them. And Ringo is legitimately a pretty decent musician, but we know all of their names, But then think about the Rolling Stones. Most people know Mick and Keith.
Right, and I can't tell you the other members of the Rolling Stones. I'll admit that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Some people will remember that Ronnie Wood joined some years later. Brian Jones was their original lead guitarist. People who were fans of them back in the day. Jones died pretty early. Like, I think he'd only been with the band like 8 or 9 years. Granted, he played lead guitar in a lot of those early hits, so people remember him for that. So he gets that. And Ronnie Wood was with the Faces, and before he was in the Faces with Rod Stewart, I can't tell you the name of a single other member of the Faces that isn't Ron Wood and Rod Stewart. Sorry. Yeah, that exists. The Rolling Stones, there's this cult of personality around them. It's Joe Perry and Steven Tyler. Never mind the fact that the 3 other members of Aerosmith are really, really crucial to that sound and have written so much to do with it. Yeah, it's...
You think about most famous rock bands, and it's interesting. The Doors started over 60 years ago, and I think that is a factor to why the rest of the band is a little more obscure than the one guy. But this is going to become a prevalent thing as we continue to move forward in time. You think about most famous rock bands, and there just must be something about humans that we want a frontman. We want to focus our attention, and usually, this is a stereotype, usually it is the singer, but, Phil Collins in Genesis, Ozzy in Black Sabbath, Halford in Judas Priest.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the guitarist of Genesis or either guitarist of Judas Priest. I can tell you Tony Iommi, but that's because Tony Iommi was the heavy metal John Lennon.
Sure. I'll tell you right now, Judas Priest, that's KK Downing and Glenn Tipton. I know that because I'm a guitarist.
Sure.
That's always been a big factor. I think about guitar players a lot. I also think about bassists because I play bass, and I think about that a lot. Now, weirdly though, think about Fall Out Boy. Patrick Stump, Pete Wentz. Do you remember the name of the other two? I think one of them's name is like Andy Trower.
Yeah, the drummer's name is Andy something. And no, I do not remember the lead guitarist of Fall Out Boy's name.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't recall. I just, for whatever reason, it just doesn't stick.
Yeah, so there has to be something sociologically where we encourage the cult of personality, and we want to fixate on the one thing.
No, and I mean I think you're right. And for the Doors, it's easy to fixate on the one character in this. If what they mean, here's where I fall, and maybe this is you tell me if this is a cruel interpretation. I think in my head, if you care about the music more than about who they are in the culture or what they represent or what they represented or what have you, then you think about who wrote that keyboard line. You think about who are the bleeding fingers behind this guitar riff. You think about that incredible, like, fascinating drum beat. Like, you think about that stuff if the music is what matters to you. I don't think that many people have sat down and just are listening to Doors albums all the way through like I do. I think maybe they're doing that for other bands, but I don't think people remember the Doors for their music. I think people remember their Doors because this asshole is in the 27th club, and there's this Oliver Stone movie, and tragic, and the death of the hippie movement, and this is what it once represented. Like, that's what they're thinking about. Well, they're not thinking about keyboards and guitars.
I agree. And you set up one half of this comparison, people looking at the Doors for the music, and then you do have the other half who are people who look back on the Doors as symbols of the counterculture, and Ray Manzarek wasn't shouting "fuck the pigs" at the whiskey, and Robbie Krieger wasn't pulling out his dick. The other guy was. And it totally is easy to think about him for those facts and for the tragic artist facts. His face is on the T-shirt, and that T-shirt. I think we've. You know what? No, I'm not gonna break a rule here. That T-shirt doesn't say so and so's name. It says The Doors.
Yeah, you're right. And it's sad because, look, Hendrix died right around the same time.
Yeah. Didn't Joplin as well?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to zero in on Hendrix because Hendrix definitively was a musician. Okay. And he's remembered a lot as a musician. People recall him. There's a reason people still say Jimi Hendrix is the greatest guitar player of all time. There's a reason you get these guitar ranking lists and people have to all but say, okay, we're ranking the best guitarists of all time, not counting Hendrix, because Hendrix is this given. I think there's an argument to be said that Hendrix may not be the best of all time, depending on what metric you're looking at. If you're looking at pure technical skill, I might give that to Wes Montgomery, who's a jazz guitarist that most people haven't heard of, because most people don't listen to jazz, and that's okay. I'm not telling all of you out there you're bad people because you don't listen to jazz. I'm just telling you, in terms of sheer technical skill, there might be some guitarists who are better than Hendrix. If you want to call Hendrix the most creative or innovative guitarist of all time, okay, we might have a conversation there, because he definitely did really interesting new shit. But here's the point. Hendrix, when somebody dies tragically, immediately there's a chance that they can be canonized, especially when they're, a big groundbreaking artist or represented something to someone. Hendrix is remembered as a great musician because he was a great musician.
Sure.
And I'm going to break now because I want to wrap this up.
Okay.
But I want to leave it with a thought. Jim Morrison is remembered for lyrics, some of which he did not write, because Krieger wrote half of Light My Fire.
Yeah.
Morrison only wrote the other half. Now, granted, Morrison wrote a lot of the lyrics for the Doors. Maybe most of the lyrics, but he's kind of remembered for these lyrics. He's not really remembered for his singing. He's kind of remembered for this stage persona, but a lot of that is wrapped up in the fact that he was, drunkenly ranting at shows,
right?
Because he was an alcoholic and he had a lot of struggles, and it's interesting to say, okay, he can be this really interesting example of a tragic figure in that regard. We can have that conversation, but Morrison doesn't deserve to be remembered as a musician, whereas Manzarek, who died a little over about a decade ago, give or take, should be. But people don't remember his name. Krieger's still doing stuff. Great stuff.
Yeah.
And I know Densmore just started a jazz trio band that just put out an album. I haven't checked it out yet, but I'm looking forward to checking it out because he's great.
Yeah, and
I've loved everything he's on.
That's especially fascinating because, again, he started his career 60 years ago. I want to watch that.
Yeah.
I want to check that out. Heck yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is legitimately sad to me that we will remember Jim Morrison for being this brilliant cultural figure.
I'm the Lizard King.
But we can't remember the people who allowed him to call himself a musician. Because without them, he just wasn't.
Without the rest of the Doors, Jim Morrison is a failed film student living on a roof in California who probably, goes to a bunch of counterculture rallies and writes some poetry and dies forgotten.
Yep, basically. So I think you summed that up perfectly. So
well,
that is my discussion of the Doors. Guys, I love the Doors. I highly encourage you. Listen to the Doors. The Doors are a great band, but when you listen to them. Don't just read the liner notes.
Sure.
Don't just focus in on the lyrics. Give some attention to the other instruments involved. And if you can, support the other work that the others came out with. Manzarek passed away not that long ago, but I just pulled it up. Densmore's band is called Tribal Jazz. That's Tribal Jazz with no space in the middle, all one word. I highly recommend check them out. And Robbie Krieger's constantly doing stuff under multiple band names. So if you just Google his stuff, please look him up. But he came out with a series of really interesting guitar-only albums over the last few years, and he is great. So check out his work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be checking out Tribal Jazz. And I think it can go for a lot of bands that, you want to actually give the credit where it's due and not just get sucked into the cult of personality, but especially for the Doors. And I quite love Jim Morrison. I love his singing. I love that drank a bottle of Jack horse scream. But,
okay.
To each their own. I also love the musicality and just the brilliance of Manzarek and Krieger and Densmore. And so I think everyone else deserves to at least acknowledge them as well.
Cool.
So,
good note to end on. Let's
go from a band of the counterculture to the culture that should be countered. Because this is kind of a weird one. These our love and our hates are not really related at all. But
I think that's the best way to do it.
Oh, good. So all of you listening, if you haven't turned off the podcast at this point because you find it hard to care about this next part, I hate the NCAA. And we're going to talk about why.
All right, this should be fun.
So for those who, like I'm a very contextually sporty person. You, Alex, are not a very sporty person.
Nope.
I think most of the people that I know for a fact are listening to this aren't necessarily sporty people. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to sum up what is the NCAA. And there's two answers. There is the NCAA's answer, which you can actually find on their website, classifying them as a member-led organization dedicated to the well-being and lifelong success of college athletes. The association shares a belief and a commitment to core values like integrity, academic excellence, sportsmanship, inclusivity.
By your powers combined, I am Captain Planet! Go Planet!
And then there is the real answer, or at least the more cynical answer, my answer. The NCAA is basically a modern-day cabal of rich old 1% mummies directly profiteering off of college teenage athletes, manipulating the collegiate sports system and bouncing around between various different lawsuits and scandals. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle of those two statements, but basically they are the organization that exists to make college football structured, and not just college football, but everyone thinks of college football, to make most college sports structured and properly balanced. And I can't even get through this. They're there to make money for themselves, and they figured out college sports are a way to do it. The NCAA was actually founded way back in 1905 by President Theodore Roosevelt.
Yes, making his second appearance on our podcast.
Making his second appearance. That's Teddy 2, I think Nixon 2, and everyone else 0. Okay, so it was founded by Theodore Roosevelt back in 1905, and it wasn't founded as a profiteering venture that it became. It was actually founded for fairly noble reasons. College football back in the turn of the 20th century was actually pretty dangerous, and there were lots of student injuries, there were student deaths, and it was becoming such a dangerous thing that colleges were trying to drop the sport of football like from their college curriculum. And good old Teddy, the guy who would do push-ups on the lawn of the White House, the dude who, thought sports were an integral part of American life, helped found the NCAA to be a rulemaking discussion group to try and, make these sports safe and do it right and have a structure rather than all these colleges just having their own football program. Now, fast forward to 1970, the NCAA is forming championship competitions for multiple sports and, importantly, regulating college football on TV. So that's what it became. And, the reason I think this is so prevalent to me, college football is huge, especially in the South. There are probably more people who root for their own or, just a college football team than there are that root for NFL teams. It is a colossal enterprise. It is a colossal financial venture.
I will just stay up front. When I lived in Florida, I was privy to no fewer than 4 different conversations in 4 completely different workplaces where men ranging from 10 to 30 years older than me all argued the point that they are more interested in watching collegiate football and collegiate basketball than professional. That they find it more interesting, that they follow the teams more, that they buy more merchandise, that they are more invested in those college games than in the professional level.
Right, because especially if you went to the school in question, it's easier to form a personal bond. What I get weird on is the fact that I know several fans who did not actually go to the schools. But there are people who root for Michigan State that never went to Michigan. There are people who support Alabama and the Red Tide who never went to Alabama. But
y'all don't even know he was a virgin until he's 28, and now roll tide.
By and whole, there are more people who can get a personal connection with a collegiate football team than with the local or the state professional sports team. But yeah, for some reason, maybe it's because the players are younger, maybe because by the fact that it is collegiate, careers are shorter and it's easier to focus on a 4-year career than a 17-year career. I don't know. College football is huge. And the NCAA, basically since college football has been a thing, has been the governing body and the regulatory committee to making it. And pretty much since people actually started paying attention, the NCAA has been in lawsuits. Lawsuits and lawsuits and lawsuits abound. The first one was in 1981, or at least the first one that was brought to actual charges. And I want to clarify, it's the NCAA versus Board of Regents for the University of Oklahoma. And the lawsuit was about overprice fixing and monopolizing college football TV rights. And the NCAA was found guilty. That's important. We see in 1970 the NCAA gets all of the college football TV rights, and I'm paraphrasing, but they become the only thing that can control how college football is shown on TV, and 11 years later they lose in a court of law over the issue of, are they manipulating prices, and are they basically monopolizing all of the financial capital from college football.
Well, It sounds to me like you guys are a couple of bookies.
Over the past few years, there have been a total of 13 other lawsuits, ranging from concussion protocol, which is something that is going to be another hate at another time. That CTE and concussions as a whole are a problem that is ravaging most contact sports. But the NCAA, being so closely tied with football, is no exception to that. They've also had lawsuits over women's sports inclusion, academic fraud, and tampering. And the big one, which isn't actually a lawsuit, but the gravity of it bears mention on this podcast, how the NCAA handled the Jerry Sandusky affair. For people who don't know who Jerry Sandusky was, he was a pedophile. He was a pedophile who, it just so happened, was also the head coach for the University of North Carolina. And after it came to light that he was a pedophile, it also came to light that UNC knew and basically kept things under the rug because he was their successful football coach. The NCAA at first very publicly admonishes UNC and makes sure Sandusky is fired, but then over the next couple of years basically bent their own rules to make sure UNC's football program thrived and survived, because UNC was one of the bigger money-making schools for the NCAA. So, to say it more concisely, the NCAA found out that one of their school's head coach was an egregious pedophile and child molester, and basically went, bad, and waited for everything to blow over, and then said, okay, let's fund money back into you, let's get you back up where you need to be so you can make us money. Which is despicable.
Was that? I thought that was Penn State.
No, it was UNC. I made
Really?
sure to research the whole Jerry Sandusky issue.
Okay. Yeah, because I know he was, because there was a big deal made about the fact that he was assistant coach under Joe Paterno, and there was this giant and I'm not an expert on this by any means, but I know Joe Paterno, as I understand, is one of the biggest legendary college football coaches of all time, and Sandusky was an assistant coach under him, and there was a big question of what did Joe Paterno know? This guy was working under Joe Paterno, did Paterno know about Sandusky? Did he know what was going on, what he was doing? And all signs seem to suggest yes,
yeah.
But also nothing. I don't think anything was proven directly, but there was this big giant question of they'd spent money on these coaches.
Yeah.
They had spent a lot of money, and these coaches made them money. So that's a sidebar question there, but that does give you a little bit more, that does give your argument a little more weight with just how much money these guys were actually making for these universities.
Right.
No, you're good. I literally just pulled up a segment on the Jerry Sandusky thing just to make sure I've got my facts right.
Well, I want to make sure.
But please
I got to
continue.
make sure I got mine right too. The initial research I did was all about Sandusky at UNC. You are correct about him also being involved with Penn State.
Yeah.
Whatever school it was that was protecting a child molester, it became clear that they knew it, they covered it up, they got caught for covering it up, and to put it in a nutshell, the NCAA pretended to give a shit and actually didn't. This is my problem, because I'm sure you could make an argument of, well, do you want to go back to the way things were where college football was a lot less safe? Do you want to abolish the NCAA and put in some sort of school-by-school regulatory board? Won't that cause problems? Won't that cause massive issues? And maybe, but my core argument is the NCAA hasn't been looking out for its players for probably close to 30 years. It's grown like a tumor into this greedy, manipulative, regulatory entity, taking money out of young athletes' pockets and, at the same time, making this this preposterous, ludicrous claim of the importance of sports programs over anything else at the college level. The NCAA is the reason that on average, the most lucrative career at any college is the head football coach.
Yep.
There's a compelling argument to be made that it's one of the largest modern day loopholes of legal slavery because, again, the student athletes do not see a dime off of their actual athletic accomplishments.
Yeah.
And it's manipulative. It's holding these people's careers and dreams in the palm of their hand, while at the same time taking all the money they're earning in the other hand, for financial compensation for likeness rights and infamy. And I don't know, college football is so damn popular that I don't think anything can really even change at this point as far as immoral skeletons in the closet. But we've been watching this enough now that I think it's not cruel of me to say that the NCAA doesn't have an actual purpose beyond giving money to the NCAA. And as such, it does not deserve to exist.
I'm very much with you. It's college athletics they're a really weird monster because I think very specifically about how the legal slavery argument, which may sound dramatic to any lay people out here, going through this or listening to this statement who aren't really looking at the issue. The reason why you can make a statement like calling it legal slavery is A, the universities as well as the NCAA make a huge profit off of the labor and work of these individuals. And don't let it be twisted, for these student athletes, it is work. They are regularly putting in daily practices amounting to a full-time job's work. That's on top of classes they're supposed to take. That's on top of everything else that they're supposed to maintain for their lives. They're especially if you are a highly ranked collegiate athlete, your future kind of depends on you not only being successful in the game, but also staying healthy, also making sure that you can attend every single practice, making sure that you remain uninjured, because guess what happens? If they get injured, if they can't play anymore, that's your ass. There are no protections for those athletes in the event that they start in on a scholarship program and then they lose their scholarship because of an injury. They lose their education. They lose that time, and they lose any opportunity for anything else.
Yeah, they lose their livelihood. And I can remember sitting at UCF and sitting in the sort of lowest level American government class that was available, and it was chock full of the student athletes, because the way colleges have gotten around balancing education with athleticism is to put athletes through the easiest courses, give them the easiest quote-unquote educational degree they can, when everybody really tongue-in-cheek knows, okay, no, you're here to be a basketball player, no, you're here to be a football player. And that's completely ass backwards.
Well, and the other side of it is, so the NCAA has very strict restrictions on paying athletes or the student athletes profiting in any direct way from their work as athletes. And there's an issue with that, because even though, on the surface, a lot of us can hear that and say, yes, no, of course, they're being paid in their scholarship money. They're being paid in the chance at an education. But when the institution establishes that for you to maintain that scholarship, for you to exist in this space, you have to forsake your academic privileges. You have to forsake actual time to study, actual rest that you require, actual proper education in cases where universities let student athletes slide through. You're robbing them of an education first and foremost, and they have a lot of them have no choice but to allow their education to be robbed in order for them to even physically be there, because they're not going to succeed on the teams if they give their academics and their athletics equal measure.
Well, that's not even getting into the fact that, the carrot being dangled in front of people's noses is, the fame and fortune of a real athletic career, a real pro sports career. And that's not getting into the fact that, 10% of all the college athletes in the world are actually going to make their respective pro leagues. That's not getting into the amount of pro athletes who are in sports like women's volleyball or all the stuff that you see only in the Olympics and isn't actually a marketable sport anyway. But look at baseball, basketball, football, hockey. 10% of the college athletes who are in these sports are actually going to make the league, and maybe another 10% are actually going to have star careers that give them the financial recompensation that that everyone is looking for, and that the NCAA is saying, we're not going to pay you now, but you're going to make it and do this, when a lot of them aren't going to make it and are going to be boned.
And there's this weird, there's this strange unspoken question there, which is the NCAA can go to the universities and basically say, okay, for your student athletes, they have to abide by these restrictions in terms of them not profiting. They have to maintain such and such kind of grade point average. They need to be in good standing as far as behavioral issues. They need this, they need this, they need this, they need this. And then the universities are then put in a position where they say, okay, we have, in order for us to succeed as a football program or a basketball program or what have you, we need to ensure that we, on paper, meet all of these requirements. Now, what do you do when, in order for your football players to succeed, they need to be practicing for 6 to 8 hours a day? Well, okay, we can see about getting them slid through their academics. What do you do when your culture treats these football players or these student athletes like on-campus gods? Because the fact of the matter is they add all of this prestige, and then once that attitude towards them goes to their head, and then they develop a toxic culture where athletes treat other students horribly, where sexual assault claims become an issue, where claims of academic fraud become an issue, and then the university is then in a position where they say, okay, well, in order to meet with these NCAA restrictions, let's sweep a bunch of this stuff under the rug and let them slide through, because the fact of the matter is, as long as these students keep successfully playing, that's more money in our pocket. And the thing is, that university getting more money, it's not that that's all, a grinding awfulness. That's part of that can help out with further scholarships in the future. That can help pay for a lot of their academic investments, but it comes at this tremendous moral cost. And the NCAA as an entity can sit here and go, well, everything looks fine here. We have all the paperwork that says all these students are maintaining their grade point averages, and none of these students have any probationary issues or any or none of them have been breaking any rules. We don't see that any of them have any sexual assault charges on campus. We can see everything's on the up and up. Look at us. We're the delightful NCAA, and we make sure that everyone is doing things correctly. And it's a sham. It's a complete sham, and they know it's a sham. They created the very structure that forces the universities to either comply through negligence and deceit, or the universities need to take the moral stand and say, we will not abide by this. Our quarterback failed his chemistry final, and therefore he's not going to be playing. Or our point guard in the basketball game, we found out that at a party he date raped someone, and we are expelling him. Like, if they take those stands, they don't get a profit from it.
Right, and
the system doesn't exist for them to. The system does not exist for them to act appropriately. It actively rewards that negligence and that refusal to do the right thing.
Right, and it's all just a big part of pro sports is modern day gladiator arena culture. I absolutely firmly believe that, and there is such a misappropriated sense of gravitas and importance, and it's shown through how money is spent on these things. It's shown through stadiums packed with red tide and millions of dollars being spent, and yeah, some of it's going to the school, but a good chunk of it is going to the NCAA. And there's the Key and Peele bit about like a teacher's draft, and if we treated if we treated education like we treat pro sports, what that would look like. And it's such a great bit of satirical farce, because like I don't care how much money is going into the school when I can sit here and just look and know that the money could be so much better spent in other infrastructure of our society. And the NCAA might not be the only proponent of why that is the way it is, but they are without a doubt one of the key pillars to why that is.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you, dude. I'm not angry that student athletics exists. I'm not even that kid who's like I got through college on loans and academic scholarships. I am not upset that there are people who get into schools on the back of athletic scholarships. I'm not. I think that the more ways we can make for more people to have higher education, the better. And I'm not upset that these programs exist. I am upset at the blatant lie of something like the NCAA existing as a regulatory agency, because they're not regulating shit.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I'm not mad at the athletes. I'm not mad at the students. I'm not mad at that. I am mad at these people that serve no greater function than to perpetuate this thing, because that's how it's been. There have been 6 presidents of the NCAA since 1951, so that's averaging every 10 years. There's a new guy. There are 6 people who have been the head of this body in the past 60 years. And that to me looks a little shady. That to me looks a little cabalish. And, I remember in a previous episode, the thing that gave me the inspiration to talk about this in the first place. They've been in football. They've been in basketball. They weren't in women's sports until women's sports sued them pretty much for inclusionary rights, and that's how the NCAA got involved with women's sports of any kind. And now they're looking at esports, which we've gone into is the big booming financial new frontier for entertainment. And I I hear that the NCAA is starting to look over at esports, and I cringe and I grit my teeth, and I get so upset that these pricks are going to find another way to get even more money and take it out of the hands of people that deserve it more.
Auspicious.
Yeah. So that's why I hate the NCAA. All right, that's the NCAA. That's my thoughts on them. Let's go ahead and get to the last segment, the relationship. Now, this episode's question has come through the internet, and here is what we've got. Hey there, LHR. Okay. My question isn't about any physical relationships, but rather my emotional relationship with, well, everyone. How do I stop being envious of other people's success? I logged into Facebook for maybe 2 minutes, and after the first post of an old friend of mine with a new promotion, I already started feeling down on myself. It's not only Facebook, though. I have this problem in general where I am envious, jealous of people around me, usually people I know who are doing well. But I think it's rooted so deeply in me from when I was younger that I don't know how to fix it or how to work on it. From The Green-Eyed Monster. And I gotta say, I love a Berenstain Bears reference whenever I can get it.
Oh, Andrew, don't read any of their new books. They're like weirdly evangelical now.
We live in a great level tree. Mama, Papa, sister, and me.
Whew. Okay. Do you want to start in for Green-Eyed Monster here, or shall I?
Man.
Okay. So, Green-Eyed Monster. Can I call you Greenie? You didn't answer. Okay, so this is a pretty funky way to phrase your question. Because it sounds like your issue is not actually with the relationship you have with any of these other people. It seems like your relationships with these people are emphasizing an innate trait to yourself. So I will state up front that I highly recommend therapy, counseling in general, to get that kind of self-examination. I will put that out front. That is the very best thing you can possibly do. The second best thing you can do is to, when you think about envy specifically, as it pertains to people you know, people you don't know maybe that well, you talk about looking at this person through a Facebook post, and you're jealous of a promotion. You say that you feel down on yourself. That suggests to me that you see someone else's success and you are formulating this comparison between where they are and where you are. Now, you don't say if this person is in your field. You don't say how long they have been at this particular job versus how long you have been at your particular job. You don't give us that context. But I will say to you that jealousy pretty much always comes from a sense of insecurity in oneself. Sometimes that insecurity is born out of some personal experience in your past. You say that you felt this way since you were young, or since you were younger. I don't know. Like, I know that it's fairly common for people who grow up in situations where they have particularly critical or narcissistic or just where they have parents who manifest their own insecurities in a teardown fashion to feel an intense degree of insecurity in and of themselves. It's pretty common. And one way that insecurity can often manifest is in taking other people's experiences and running with them like there is an unequivocal comparison right there. Like, okay, this other person who should be at my level, they're in this one particular way not. They are above me in a way that I'm perceiving, and that causes me an internalized depression. And in those moments, it might help you to actually just sit down with that feeling and interrogate it. And I know that's uncomfortable, especially if you're actively feeling down on yourself, But look at their situation. Look at the situation of one of those people who you're jealous of, and think, what is it that they have that I want? Why does it bother me that they have it and I don't?
I want to say something I want you to really analyze, Mr. or Mrs. Monster. I think you might be looking at one metric of success and possibly ignoring others. You talk about seeing somebody got a promotion, so you are looking at somebody in the context of career and work. And that's really not the only thing, or at least it shouldn't be the only thing that gets somebody through the day-to-day life. That's not the only metric of success that there is. I want to say I very much understand where you're coming from. My career being in production, I was an intern for one of the bigger TV companies in Orlando. And there's a intern-only Facebook group, and every once in a while, we are called by our old coordinator to list where we are and basically, give a career update. And there are people who are doing very well, and there are people who are maybe not doing so well. But there is emotion, there is personal relationship, there are so many other things that you can look into yourself and check in on that maybe you're not, and maybe that would help you realize that you don't need to compare yourself to these other people in such a direct manner or by this only thing. And I do want to say I agree with Alex about looking into therapy, and I want to go ahead and say there is absolutely nothing wrong with doing so. Therapy can be a very scary thing for a lot of people, but I think it is also more often than not an incredibly helpful, incredibly beneficial experience.
Yeah, I mean, I have had 2 counselors in my life, and it's funny because I'm in the process of seeing a counselor right now, and I'm in an awkward situation where my employment, thankfully, is able to cover my costs for a certain number of counseling sessions, and I'm coming in at the end of those covered costs, and I have my last session with this particular counselor next week. But at my last session with her, I told her I have a lot of anxiety about stopping counseling. And she, like a good counselor, asked me a bunch of questions about that and wanted to know. And the thing that I kind of kept coming back to was my life feels better when I have regular counseling. When I sit down with somebody once a month for an hour and they ask me some deep questions. That works for me. It does me a lot of good. So if you have the ability to do that, and I understand if you don't, no shame there, money's a factor. I'm very privileged to have an employer who's willing to give me that, like willing to pay for the certain number of sessions that I have and do so in a confidential manner, where I don't feel like where no one at my place of employment who I don't want to know that I'm getting counseling knows I'm getting counseling. Like, I'm very privileged to have that, and I honor that, and I understand that you might not, and that's okay. But if that is available to you, I highly recommend taking advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you say that this has been a deep-seated issue, and this is something that that's been happening to you for a while. I think definitely the best way to combat that, if it is your desire to combat that, I think it's in your best interest is to talk to somebody professionally about it. In the day-to-day, going on Facebook and having and it bringing you down to have gone on Facebook and to read this thing. There's something to be said for taking healthy breaks from social media. I know several people who have let go of Facebook in particular for various reasons, and maybe taking a break from it could help you in this instance. And also, I just want to remind you, it's never too late. If maybe the reason you are looking at people and feeling bad about where they are in their career versus where you are specifically, maybe that has to do with you not liking where you are in your career. It's never too late to make a change, and it's never too late to really come into your own. There are several examples I could list off, mainly in the arts and in acting, but my point is, no matter how old you are, maybe you make a change, and you absolutely can do that. And that's my other piece of advice for you.
And I'm going to close out with one more thing. And this is a piece of practical advice. This is something that I want to ask you to try, because it has been weirdly successful for me. And Andrew, I'm sorry, this is about to sound crunchy as hell. So maybe not. Maybe it's not super crunchy, but it's crunchy by my standards,
earphones.
my nihilistic, shitty standards. So every time you encounter, let me tell you this. I'm a writer. I follow writers. A lot of my friends are writers. I am a writer who is currently in swabs of large projects. I'm not submitting like I probably should. A lot of that is the fact that I'm working on one big project, and a lot of that is it's terrifying and time-consuming and mentally exhausting, and that's something I need to own. That's a separate issue. But I follow my friends, and I follow people I admire, whether it's on Twitter or even just, they message me their stuff. Like, I've got friends who are publishing in really interesting, great places. And I am not going to tell you that I don't have an instinct to feel jealousy at that. I've got a very good friend right now who just got his first book deal. And dude is my age, and I heard that, and in the mix of emotions there, I felt some degree of jealousy. And the practical advice I give you, this is the thing that I have chosen to do when the people in my life are having professional successes that I want, is before I react, before I have time to think about it, the first thing I do is I congratulate them, and I tell them that I'm proud of them. Every time one of my friends gets a book review published, gets a journal article published, gets a story or a poem published, I share that shit everywhere. I put it out there, and I tell them, I'm proud of you. Every time I see it, I'm like, I am so proud of you. Hey, everybody, look at what my friend did. When they tell me this stuff in person, when they have successes beyond me in person, I give them a hug and I tell them, I am so proud of you. You did such a good job. You deserve this. And I don't know what it is, but the fact that I put that forward verbally, that I verbalize to them, I am proud of you. You are successful. I don't even think to myself that often anymore, hey, I wish that I had your success. Hey, I'm jealous of you. Because there's something about just audibly vocalizing that I'm proud of them that it turns me into the person who thinks that first. Because I'm the person who does that action consistently, because I'm so supportive. So, when your Facebook friend has a promotion, instead of going, I want a promotion, I'm sad about that. Before you do that, if you end up having that thought, okay, but before you have that thought, I want you to open up that Facebook post and type underneath it, congratulations, I'm so proud of you. When you're out with people and they tell you, I just got engaged, I just bought a house, I finally fixed my relationship with my parents, whatever it is, whatever successes they have, whatever good news they have, instead of, if you end up feeling bad about yourself afterwards, okay, but before you give yourself time to feel bad. Give yourself the time and the acumen to tell them, congratulations, I'm so proud of you. I don't know what it is. There's something about that action that for me has completely changed so much of my view about it. And I feel, I'm not going to say it's 100% better, but I feel better, way better than I did before about it. So that is a piece of practical advice. That is a challenge I pose to you, Green-Eyed Monster. Next time you run into
And I don't think that was crunchy at all. I thought that was wonderful.
Oh, you're a sweetheart.
Well, so there you go, Greenie. I think we've given you some ideas of ways you can combat this issue, both internally and externally. I really hope it helped.
Yeah.
And I'll be checking in on you to see how you're doing in a while, and if if you can help change your worldview a little bit. So that's been us. That's been our show. That's been Love-Hate Relationship. Just a reminder, if you have a relationship problem with a loved one, friend, coworker, we just kind of did one that was a relationship with yourself, and I'm going to count that. If you have a question for us, please send them in. You can send them to lovehaterelationshippodcast@gmail.com, and we promise we'll read them.
You can subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or even TuneIn Radio. You can also see our website at lovehaterelationship.net. You can submit your questions there, as well as just kind of check out all our stuff in one place. And you can tweet us at LHRpod, that's LHRPOD, with your questions, and follow us there to keep up with new episodes.
That's right. If you want to follow us personally, I'm Andy Boel. You can follow me at Twitter at JovoCop2113.
And I'm at A_X_RUIZ on both Twitter and Instagram. As always, everyone, thank you so much for listening. And once again, as always, please tell your enemies.